Welcome to Still Unbelievable, a podcast by Reason Press, where we examine religious claims, especially those made by Christians, and we regularly respond to items that are featured on the podcast Unbelievable. We embrace dialogue, but as skeptical former believers, we will also criticise unfounded claims and unsupported beliefs. Welcome to another episode of Still Unbelievable. This time, being the day that it is, the 4th of November, although it will be several weeks later by the time you listen to this, my F5 key on my keyboard is worn so clean, I really needed something to do. So I've got in touch with Andrew and we've just wheeled in the first passerby that we could find on the street. So without any further ado, Andrew and Matthew would like to welcome the man with the coolest haircut of the three of us. It is Jon Steingard. Welcome to the show, John. It's a genuine pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, fellas.
And a cooler accent as well. I mean, how much better can this get?
Well, see, I'm going to be spending this entire conversation enjoying your accent. So if the feeling's even a little bit mutual, that's nice.
Awesome.
I feel so left out.
Hey, I like the Southern accent too, man.
So Matthew gave himself away, the F5 key worn clean. He's a Windows user, folks.
Yeah, I had to
Command R on the Mac.
I had to sit and think about my childhood, and I'm like, is that the refresh key, or is that the? Do you still have a print screen key?
Yes. Yes.
Wait, do PCs still have a print screen key? Is that for real?
They really do.
We do.
Oh my gosh, guys!
And we've also got a right to click as well.
Yeah.
I'm a Mac user. I'm
yeah.
So don't blame me for Matthew's failings.
Oh,
sure.
Now, Andrew, if you told me he was going to be a Mac user, I might have changed my mind about this.
Yeah.
Hey, I didn't know. I didn't know. But it is the one conversion that I hope never to hear out of John, that he left the Mac and went to the PC.
Yeah, that's unlikely. It's pretty unlikely. I consider it every now and again because I do video production, and you can build out a really incredible spec'd out PC for much cheaper than you can on a Mac. Every time I get on a PC, I'm just instantly angry. And so I just figure for my mental health, I'll spend a little bit more and spec out a Mac,
Matthew, we did not rehearse this.
We did not. You did not rehearse that, and I don't know how to respond to that at all. I am just completely outclassed by that statement. I really am.
Matthew and I are both IT geeks, John.
Oh, right on.
Right. You just landed right in the middle of an ongoing.
Yeah. I'm not going to do well in this one, so I'm just going to shut up and pretend I'm normal.
Well, we can stop talking about computers. So.
Andrew has offered that to me multiple times, and it's not happened yet. So, winding it back on track. So, John, for the few listeners who have not heard of you or heard you on any other podcast, because you've been on quite a few podcasts over the last 12 months, tell us a little bit of background, who you are, how you arrived at the situation that you're in, and why we've asked you to come onto our podcast.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Canadian originally, and I grew up in a Christian home. And my dad's a pastor. And around 2004, I joined a band called Hawk Nelson, which is a group of Christian guys like myself. And we started traveling around Canada and the US playing shows. And that was my career for 16 plus years. And pretty much, almost my entire adult life has been spent in this Christian band, playing shows primarily for Christians and singing songs primarily about God. And that has been my life. And then over the last couple of years, just internally in my own personal life, I began to sort of question some of the aspects of the faith that I had and the culture I was a part of within Christianity, and began to wonder if all of this stuff that I have always believed was really true, or whether I had just been a part of whatever I had grown up in and just accepted it. And so the more I sort of dove into it, the more I found that I really was struggling to believe what I had always been taught in Christianity. And that culminated in earlier this year, finally me feeling like I needed to be honest publicly about my feelings on the issue. And so I wrote a post in May of this year, 2020, a post basically saying, I've reached this point where I feel that I no longer believe in God, and here's why. And that sort of kicked off a pretty crazy couple of months, because I didn't realize that it would be, I guess, a substantial thing for the lead singer of a Christian band like the one I was in to come out and say that. And it was picked up all over the national news media in the US. I think potentially a few outlets abroad as well. I think potentially in the UK also. But it caused this stir, I guess. And one of the things that was really interesting about that to me was that it put me in contact with so many people that were wrestling with some of the same things that I was wrestling with, and maybe doubting some of the same things that I was doubting. And so the last 6 months has basically been a journey of having conversations with a lot of those people, and then also continuing to have conversations with people in Christianity and walking that out, hopefully with kindness and a desire to find what is really true. And that's kind of what's led me to where I'm at today.
Thank you. Has it really only been since May this year? I could have sworn it was last year you made that post.
Well, I mean, a lot has happened since then, both for me personally and in the world. So, yeah, for me, a lot of the processing that I did has been the last couple of years, because I really spent a lot of time dealing with sort of my questions and my doubts before I said anything publicly. But yeah, as far as the public aspect of this journey, yeah, it's been, since May. So not that long.
No, and I don't know when it actually hit in the UK. I first heard about it on Justin Briley's podcast, Unbelievable. That's when he mentioned it. And I think it makes more sense here in the UK that I would hear something like that from a Christian source, because religion here in the UK isn't quite as overt as it is over in the States.
Right. So, and in Canada, where I'm from, it's very similar. Someone coming out and saying that they don't believe in God. In Canada, I don't know if that's news.
So. No, it wouldn't even make a ripple in the secular press here.
Yeah.
The Christian press will go crazy over it, and people like Andrew and myself who are interested in these kind of conversations will pick up on it. But the only way we'll find out about it, certainly for me, would be by keeping in touch with Christian sources for things like that.
Right.
So that was how I heard of it, and I must confess, I hadn't heard of Hawk Nelson, but then you said 2004 was when you started.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, my exit from Christianity was around about 12, 13 years ago now. So it's not a long time after that. But I have tried out some of your music, and I definitely would have been a fan.
Oh, thank you.
Music of a Christian, from Christian bent really isn't my thing anymore. I've listened to too much of it over the years, and I really need to take a break from it. But in my Christian days, I was really, really big into Petra. I've probably got all their albums still somewhere. So that's where I was. And there was a band in the UK called the Worldwide Message Tribe. No idea if you've heard of them.
I haven't.
I've got all of their stuff, and then obviously lots of other ones, but Petra was the big thing for me. In fact,
one of my biggest musical influences was British, and it was a band called Delirious.
Yes, I'm familiar with Delirious, yeah. Mm-hmm. I didn't really get on with Delirious. Their music was a bit too soft for me. I preferred the more rocky tones of Petra, and the Worldwide Message Tribe, who I mentioned to you, a bit more dancey. So that was really more my area. Delirious, I think there was only one song that they did which I really engaged with, but most of their stuff it was too soft pop for me.
Yeah, sure, I get that. Yeah,
I was a big a cappella vocal band AVB fan.
Oh, yeah.
Betty. Oh, do you know AVB?
No.
Okay,
no, but
that was going to be really
when I said, oh yeah, I guess I was associating that musical style with where you're from, and
that's exactly right.
And it felt congruent to me.
It is. So Church of Christ.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So yeah, you've already got the picture. I can tell by the tone of voice. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But to give the band its due, they were really, really good rock a cappella music. And if you're listening, you think, I don't think that's possible. look up AVP. Um, they did a good job.
Yeah,
I've got to
awesome.
know. I've got to know, man. You said that your dad was in the ministry, and
Still is.
and my dad is a Southern Baptist. He has been a preacher. He still does weddings and funerals and that kind of thing on occasion. He's a guy that has 3 volumes of Adam Clark, right? And they're all in tatters, and he's looking for a place to have them rebound. He's that kind of Southern Baptist, and he can't come to a place where he can acknowledge that he has a son that is atheist. We can't talk about it. We may be able to one day, right? Because these things sneak up on you where it takes a while to get used to an idea or whatever. But where are you and your dad? Have you managed to carry on a good relationship, or is he having trouble acknowledging? Well, I might have overspoken for you. Do you call yourself an atheist, or are you just a skeptic? Are you an agnostic? I don't want to overspeak for that part of the story.
It's funny because those terms sometimes mean different things to different people. So I don't actively claim any of those labels really, but the technical definitions of them certainly apply to me. Like I've heard people say that, atheism is a label that denotes belief or lack of belief, and agnosticism is talking about knowledge. Mm-hmm. So technically, I suppose I would be an agnostic atheist because I don't know that whether God is real or not, and I don't have a belief in him necessarily. So technically I'd be an agnostic atheist, but from my view, I'm sort of in this place where I have a desire for there to be a bigger story in reality than just myself, and I have a desire for there to be something beyond the material, but I don't at the moment have any reason to believe that there is anything like that. And it's just a big question mark for me. So I don't have any specific beliefs beyond the natural materialistic world, but I'm open to it.
I think you've hinted there, John, on something that's probably quite important in these kinds of conversations. And I think a lot of people miss the nuance. The point at which somebody says, I can no longer identify as Christian, that is just a mile marker on the road of their life. It's not an absolutist position that says this is the end of something which can never be returned to. And it's also not necessarily this is the start of something which is now permanent, because it's and if I can give an example from my own life, and my guess here is that yours is a little similar. The journey up until when I said, okay, here I am, I'm no longer Christian, what am I? That was actually a lot of thinking and a lot of challenging and a lot of wrestling with ideas and beliefs, and a lot of changing in the ideas I accepted and the ideas of beliefs. It wasn't that the point at which I said I can no longer identify as Christian, that wasn't when all of those beliefs changed. That was just the realization that all the beliefs that had changed in the previous 3 years now meant something. Does that mean the same for you?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think I remain open. The way that I sort of think about it is that if something, if some reality or some truth is sort of appears in front of me in a way that's undeniable, I don't have no plan on fighting that. So I continue to be really curious about spirituality in general. And I think I hesitate to actively claim a specific label because I feel like you just said, it almost indicates that your search is over. And I don't feel that is the case for me. Technically, agnostic atheist is probably accurate. And yeah, in regards to your question about my dad, it's been a challenge, but we've had a lot of conversations both before I went public and after. And, we still have a good relationship. We love each other. We're not arguing. The hardest part of this journey for me has been knowing that my parents worry about me going to hell.
Yeah.
And I have kids myself. So if I believed that about my own son, I mean, that would weigh on me all day, every day.
Yeah.
It would be soul wrenching, wouldn't it?
Yeah. And so the thought that I'm doing that to my parents, which to a degree, I'm not sure that I fully am, because I kind of get the sense that they are taking the approach that God's in control. And, God's going to reveal himself to John at some point. And when they say that to me, I go, hey, if he's there, I want that. I mean, if God is real, I don't want to avoid him. Like, I
Right.
just don't think that he is. And so I think it's a complicated issue, but I think on some level, my parents are trusting that God will reveal himself to me. And that's their home base, of how they sort of get up in the morning and live their lives and not live in fear of, whatever might happen to me.
I'm glad that you guys are able to do that.
Yeah.
That they can find a place. If they're wrong, they're comfortable. If they're right, they're comfortable, and you're in the same place, and you guys can carry on. I think that's hugely important, no matter what the end of the story is, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Finding some place to support each other in the meantime, that's a big deal for everybody involved.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
I'd like you to wear a counsellor's hat for a moment then, John, because for those who've heard some of my stories, specifically the version of my story that's on the podcast, The Graceful Atheist, and I tell my story, the mistake that I made, to certainly with those that I love, is I didn't communicate with them. So when I said, I didn't really do a formal coming out, but when I told the people that I love the most that I could no longer identify as Christian, it was actually, the deal had been done for me by then. I'd already done the journey, and I'd already comfortably accepted the label of atheist. And so when I told the people that closest to me, and we had these conversations, I said, well, I've done all my thinking, I've made my decision, I'm now atheist. And that comes as quite a shock to those that you care about and those that you love when it happens like that, because you've robbed them of the conversation. Yeah. So what would you say to somebody listening to this who's in that moment of problem? They clearly need to talk to somebody, but they don't know somebody. They don't know. I'll rewind that because I need to add some clarity there. Sure. The reasons why I didn't fess up earlier was because I was afraid of hurting people I cared about more than anything else. That was really what it was. So it was cowardice. I accept that it was a cowardly act because I just didn't know how to have that conversation. And I knew the necessity of that conversation meant hurting people I cared about. So what would you say to somebody in that position who's struggling with that? They fear that the conclusion they're coming to is they're going to no longer be able to identify as Christian. Let's forget about what happens after that. What's your advice to them about reaching out to their loved ones about having that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I would say is you don't want your loved ones to find out on social media or in some sort of mass text or email or something like that. Like those conversations are best had in person if possible. They're best had in the context of like a loving relationship, and posture is just as important as position. So how you approach these people that you care about is important. And you can say like, hey, this is where I'm at. These are things that I'm feeling. My journey is not final here, but I've been thinking about it for some time, and I do feel quite strongly about this. I love you. I care about you. I want you in my life. I don't feel like this separates us at all. I don't feel like it has to, but I recognize that this might be very, very difficult for you to accept. And you also might have questions, and you might be frustrated with me, but I welcome your questions. I want to be open, and I'll answer any question you have as best as I can. And if you sort of walk into the conversation with that kind of posture and not approach it as if it's going to be an argument, approach it as if like, hey, my goal in this conversation is to be honest with you and actually to improve our relationship by being transparent rather than to make it worse by, having an argument.
Thank you, John. That was really good advice. And I genuinely wish I'd heard that 10 years ago when it was me.
Well, it's hard.
I really do. It is hard. And
yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that these are difficult, intense experiences for us as individuals. And they're going to be difficult, intense conversations sometimes as well.
Yeah, for sure.
We know where you are now. And Matthew and I are probably in pretty similar positions to you. I describe myself as a weak atheist. You say agnostic atheist. They're pretty similar, right?
Sure.
I've examined a number of God hypotheses. None of them are convincing. I am not saying that there is no God. I am saying that I haven't discovered a God concept that I think compels me toward belief. So, but it seems like when I get into these conversations, having been a former Christian like you, one of the things that comes out right away is what caused you not to believe. Mm-hmm. And I think the question's okay, but it doesn't actually fulfill what the Christian wants to know, because the journey out of Christianity is as complex as the journey while you're in, right?
Oh, certainly. Yeah.
But I wonder if you would like, if you can describe how it is that someone who is clearly in a place to be a hard-fighting soldier for Jesus, right? You're the lead singer for a band that is going around and proclaiming gospel, singing about the Savior of humanity, right?
Yeah.
And in some way, during that walk, I'm not exactly sure how you'd describe it, but from the outside, it seems like doubt crept in at some point, and you find yourself where you are today. And I wonder how that started, if you know.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know to a degree, but not completely. You've obviously had enough of these conversations that, sometimes it's hard to pinpoint.
Yeah.
But for me, in my initial post in May, I described losing my faith as sort of an unraveling of a sweater, because I found these threads that were problematic a while ago, and I started just sort of pulling on them and seeing like, well, what happens when I investigate this? And it kept on going and going and going. And eventually I sort of came to this point where I was like, oh, wow, I don't think I believe it all. And to be specific, like a few issues, it was just like every once in a while, every couple of years, something would come up that I would just notice, and I would go, oh, that's interesting. So like an example is I grew up in a very charismatic church. And it was actually a group of churches that was actually dismissed from the Vineyard. And the Vineyard was a very charismatic movement. And it was dismissed for a bunch of like wild and crazy things that were sort of going on at the time. I ended up when I moved out when I was 17 and on my own, and I started going to a Baptist church. And the Baptist church, even though we're still talking about the Christian God, we're still talking about Jesus, we're reading the same Bible, but their approach to their faith was just completely different. And one of the things that they didn't believe in was speaking in tongues. And I was like, oh, so I just assumed all Christians believed in speaking in tongues. And I come to find out that's not the case. And then like another issue was their male leaders were called pastor. But if they had a female leader of any department in the church, they would use the word director. Right. And I was like, well, what's that about? And then they pointed me to scriptures that talked about women not being in leadership. And I was like, oh, I've never seen these before. And sure enough, here they are. And so that was a sort of a red flag. I was like, it seems weird that women can't be pastors. That seems sort of backwards and not, how's that loving? And then, years later, when I was in the U.S. and the U.S. the Supreme Court passed the law legalizing same-sex marriage, I remember having this gut feeling that I was like, well, that seems like progress. But I knew I couldn't say that publicly because it would probably cost me my career.
Right, because there's that whole Romans chapter 1 thing that the vast majority of conservatives would still point to. Romans 1:27, I think it is.
Yeah, when Paul uses a very specific word that actually isn't. It's a Greek word. I can't aposta something or other. I can't remember what it. I don't know my Greek. It's not even about scripture entirely. It's more about culture. It's like the culture of Christianity in North America, particularly. It doesn't tend to be affirming of homosexuality. So I knew if I came out and said, hey, this is a good thing that same-sex couples can get married, I knew that would probably sink our career. And that fear was confirmed because another band named Jars of Clay had this singer named Dan Hazeltine, who I had met a few times. And when that Supreme Court decision was passed down, he was in Australia. He got on a plane to go back to the U.S., and right before they took off, he tweeted support for the same-sex marriage decision. And by the time he landed, their career was basically over. And so I saw that whole thing play out, and I was like, well, sure enough, I was right that I can't say this. And then, as time went on, I started to see more and more things where like my gut feeling was taking me in one direction, and Christian culture, the Christian culture that I was embedded in was saying something different. And so I was sort of going like, okay, like, it feels like I want to go in this direction. And I always feel like I'm erring on the side of wanting to be loving and supportive and affirming of people. And I'm actually feeling like my Christianity is keeping me from doing that as much as I want to. And that's strange. So I started studying scripture a lot more as I started having these questions come up in my mind. And when I did that, that's when things really started to come apart, because I started to find all these things I did not know were in the Bible. They were incredibly problematic. And while Christian apologists have answers for almost everything, the sheer number of the issues that I found in the Bible, things that bothered me or things that seemed inconsistent, it put me in a place where I was like, well, I don't think the Bible's inerrant. I can't believe that anymore. There's just too many problems. And then the question entered my mind, like, well, if the Bible's not the perfect word of God, then what is it? And, if it's written by humans, then it's imperfect and it's flawed. And maybe it makes sense that, they're speaking out against homosexuality and women in leadership. And that's just like a cultural thing from thousands of years ago. But then it occurred to me, and if I had just stopped there, I would have become a progressive Christian, which is still tempting to me sometimes.
Right. Just be a Presbyterian and call it all back. Right?
Sure. Yeah. But once I had gone that far, I just felt like, okay, what if God is not real? If the scriptures are really human and really flawed, then like, what do I have to go on? That was sort of on an intellectual level. And then I had an experience where I went and I did a documentary film in Uganda. This is about 2 years ago. And I saw suffering on a scale that I have never, ever seen before. And while I was there, I was just struck with the thought that, like, what I'm seeing in front of me is not congruent with the idea of an all-powerful and all-loving God. And I was just like, if God is real and he's loving and he's powerful, and if he intervenes in our lives the way that the Bible seems to indicate that he does, then why am I seeing what I'm seeing right now? I grew up with people saying like stuff like, oh, God is so good. He answered my prayer, even my tiny little prayer for a parking spot at church. God just loves me so much. He's answering that prayer. And then I go to Uganda and I see people also praying to God, but for their very survival. And I'm seeing in this community I was in that 50% of the children don't make it to the age of 5. I'm seeing suffering on a scale that I'd never experienced. And I just went, what explains this? And the best explanation for me was that God wasn't there at all. And that was not a welcome realization. I think sometimes people think when someone leaves Christianity or leaves their faith that it's because they want to do a bunch of sinning or something. And
we get told that all the time.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, literally, I'm not joking. Once a day, someone on social media says, well, I know that you just left because you're gay. And I'm like, first off, all of my friends that are gay are awesome. And so like, thank you for the compliment. Yep. And awesome. And secondly, like, I know you're saying that like it's a bad thing, but like, do you understand that that's not an insult to me? And then thirdly, I'm a straight white 37-year-old male who's married with 2 kids. Like, I'm as vanilla as it gets, man.
Right. Yeah. Right.
And so, so for me, it wasn't like I didn't leave Christianity because I have some secret sin or like I'm struggling to justify some horrible thing that's in my life or whatever. It's just that I saw suffering that was best explained by the lack of God. And that was sort of congruent with everything that I had been studying in scripture and, sensing in culture. And then, it sort of all culminated in feeling like that all sort of dovetailed together, all of those things. And I was like, wow, I actually don't think this is real. And that's kind of how it played out for me.
It's interesting. I identify with a lot of what you just said. The problem of sin and suffering is a big one to me today because the world is filled with suffering. And if we leave the shores of the contiguous 48 states or whatever, 49 if you include Canada. Sorry. That is not intended to diminish Canada, a country that I love.
No, right now Canada's feeling pretty good, actually. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, they don't have the same problem on November 3rd that the United States has. So, I identify with the problem of sin and suffering, but what started my journey out was that I felt like the Bible went out of its way to try to describe reality, and specifically to try to make certain kinds of physical claims about the universe, right? Like the Genesis story and that sort of thing. But it doesn't stop there, right? And so science was the thing that I thought was pitted against the pages of the Bible. And somehow empirical investigation, I think, wins out over the sort of tools that you see that people are asked to use in the Bible. And in fact, empirical investigation has been our best means of discovering how the world works. And the Bible just gets some of that stuff wrong. And,
oh, absolutely. And I had a similar aspect to my journey too when I studied evolution. Because I was just like, oh my gosh, like we weren't the only species of hominid.
Right.
There were other hominids, and that's pretty indisputable. And and so like, were they also made in the image of God? And if we evolved from a common, if us and chimpanzees evolved from a common ancestor, at what point did we gain the image of God? If you're an old Earth creationist who believes that God used evolution to make human beings and that Genesis is metaphorical, but you still believe, then I would go like, well, at what point did we become made in the image of God? When did that happen?
Right.
And so it's just there. I'm with you. There's certain problems that are just sort of difficult to get around. And, the Bible was clearly written from the perspective of people that believed in a 3-tiered universe. So like there's earth in the middle, and when they say the heavens and they're talking about the sky, they actually also literally mean the heaven. Like they thought that they could see it, and they thought hell was below them. And I think about that sometimes, and I'm like, can you imagine what that would have been like to look up at a starry night sky with no light pollution of any kind and believe that you are looking at heaven? Like what? That would have been incredible. To think that.
That is a really interesting thought experiment. I don't know that I've thought about it quite that way, but you're right. We were sort of a snow globe in the middle, right? We're just the ground in the snow globe, and somewhere above the snow globe is heaven, and you've got hell underneath somewhere, and the whole casting down of angels, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't honestly know. Looking back today, I remember being a Christian, and in fact, I was a young Earth creationist, as was Matthew.
So was I. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we were all yeks. Welcome to the converted Yek Society. Yeah. And I look back at it now, and I remember my professional life and thinking clearly about the sorts of problems that I would solve professionally. But I think about religion, and today I can't honestly identify what it was that had me think the way I did, other than self-deception. And that's probably too strong, but at any rate, the tools that I used to think about young Earth creationism, to think about biblical inerrancy, to think about God flooding the world and killing all but 8 souls, that kind of thing. Those kinds of thoughts, I know I had them. I know I defended them. I know I taught them. And yet I look back, and that part of my life from where I am now seems very foreign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. There's so many things that I took as a given that I look back at now and I go, wow, I had no rational reason to believe that. Except the fact that it's just what I was raised with. And for me, so much of it was just culture. So I was, raised in a Christian home as a pastor's kid. And so my whole world was the church that we were in and the social groups within that church. And then at the age of 20, I joined a Christian band and started touring. And so I was in the bubble of Christian music, and almost my entire life up until recently, I was firmly entrenched, ensconced in Christianity. And if politics is this way too. It's like if you surround yourself with people only, or almost entirely people that believe a certain thing, you're going to tend to believe that unless it's seriously directly challenged and you're willing to reconsider, which is, changing your mind on something is incredibly painful and people don't want to do it. So typically they just don't. So for me, like my journey out of Christianity was, I went kicking and screaming, man. And it was bit by bit. Like I was like, okay, well, maybe I just have problems with the Bible, but I believe in God, and then, it's like, maybe I don't believe in the atonement. Maybe I believe in the doctrine of Christus Victor. Like, because I had sort of an issue with like, why did Jesus need to die for God to forgive us? And if it was to pay the price for our sins, then who is he paying the price to? So God is allowing his son to die, which is also him, so that he can pay the price to himself.
Right.
Well, and then when I was studying, I realized that for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, a very common view is that he was paying the price to Satan. And it was actually, I could be wrong on this, but my understanding is that was a common view. And then it was actually St. Anselm of Canterbury around 1000 CE that basically firmed up the doctrine of atonement and popularized it. And that it was the idea that the debt to be paid was actually to God himself. Because it sort of implied that Satan had one over on God if God had to pay him off, right? And so St. Anselm didn't like that. And so it's like, there's all these weird logical problems within Christianity that you just accept, like the Trinity, like the only religion in the world that believes in something that's could be described as monotheism, but could also be described as polytheism. Mm-hmm. And it's also interesting that, Judaism is strictly monotheistic, but Christianity is actually so influenced by Greek culture, and Greek culture was polytheistic. So is it any surprise that we have something that's sort of trying to mash those two things together? Yeah. To me, it sort of makes sense.
It does. There's so many contradictions. Well, I guess if you're a Christian listening, you probably have rescued all of these problems already, right? And you still don't see the trouble that we're talking about. But I agree. There's a lot here to untangle, and you don't know when you start your journey out which ones are going to be the real bugaboos, right?
Yeah.
For me, it started at Genesis 1. And the Church of Christ had this, and they still have, this thing that they say to people from the pulpit. I should actually thank them for this because it was a key part of my way out. But they say regularly from the pulpit, if you find something in the Bible that's untrustworthy, if there's one thing that you can't trust, you don't know that there's anything in there you can trust.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's what got me where I'm at. Right. I had this conversation at one point with my father-in-law, who's a wonderful man. He's a believer. We were talking about the various translations of the Bible, and we were talking about 2 Timothy, the passage that's talking about women. Mm-hmm. And how they shouldn't speak in church. And he indicated that he felt like that the King James Version had emphasized things like that and that it was biased as a result. And I said, okay, well, so you think the King James Version is biased. I just also think the original is biased. And he said, well, if you believe that, then what do you have left? And I said, exactly.
Nice.
And I wasn't trying to land a point with him. It was a genuine conversation. And that was a moment where I realized that he was actually entirely right. That once you give up the idea that the original writings of, say the Gospels, once you give up the idea that that's not perfect and that it's biased and it has errors and that it might have things in it that aren't true, once you give that up, it's like you have no objective grounding for your faith anymore. And that's why evangelical Christians are so gung-ho about inerrancy. It's because once you give that up, it's like everything's relative and you can claim that God is whatever you want him to be, which is their greatest fear. Like they would actually rather contend with people who say that there's no God than contend with people who say that God is real, but they disagree on his nature. Like that's a scarier contention for them, which is why they're so freaked out about the progressive Christian movement now.
Yeah. And on that translation issue, it has always seemed to me, I took a semester of Greek back in college. I remember,
did you?
Yeah, well, I don't remember any of it. If I tell people I know a little Greek, it's the guy that makes pizza, at the eatery here in town, right? So, I really don't It's one of those courses that I struggled through, but it seems to me that Greek ought not be necessary. If I can't trust the English Bible or the German Bible or the French Bible or whatever Bible is my native tongue, there are a great many of us who don't have the mental equipment to learn Greek through no fault of our own, because that idea of learning languages and that sort of thing, for most of us, it closes down around 5 or 6 or 7, right? Our language patterns are established, and learning a foreign language is not only hard, it simply might not be something we can do. And so an all-powerful God, a maker and winder of the universe, the guy that can tinker with the gears at any moment, this dude ought not need us all to learn Greek.
Yeah, and you're touching on something really important there. I didn't realize how central this idea was to my apostasy, as it were. For a long time, I really thought that the problem of evil was my sort of biggest issue with belief. And I realized as I was reflecting that actually my biggest issue has a lot to do with what you just said. And it's this concept of divine hiddenness. So it's like, basically you could state it as, if God is real, where is he? And why does the world look so very much like what you'd expect to see if God wasn't real? And
how do you tell the difference? Yeah.
How do you tell the difference between a God who's hidden and a God who doesn't exist? And for me, I was raised, the different people have different expressions of Christianity for sure, but I was raised in a tradition that was very much focused on personal relationships. So it was like, hey, how's your walk with Jesus? The most important thing that you need to do is have a relationship with Jesus. And I always, even when I was a believer, I always struggled with that. I was like, well, I'm reading the Bible, I'm praying, but I don't know that I feel like I have a personal relationship with Jesus the way that I have with my friends or my parents or, whatever. And when I had my son, I sort of had this epiphany that oh man, I want to be present in his life. I want to be an active force for good in my son's life. It occurred to me that if my son grew up to be an adult, and if he came to question my very existence, then I've done something wrong as a parent. We might have disagreements as he gets older, but he's going to know I exist because I'm present in his life in a way that's just he would never even think to question. And so I go if God's a loving father, then how is it that I'm even able to ask if he's real? Shouldn't that be so undeniable that thought would never even occur to me? And then, if I present that to a Christian, most Christians will say, well, you're sort of choosing then how, you're dictating to God how you want him to show up in your life. And I'm saying, no, I'm not dictating anything. I'm just saying if God wants me to believe that he's there, the least that he could do is show up.
Yeah.
If I never was in my son's life, and somebody was like, oh, no, you have a dad and he loves you so much, his first question would be okay, well, why wasn't he around? Yeah. And that's kind of how I feel about God. I'm just if God is there and he's loving, I want a relationship with him. I'm just 37 and I've never seen him or heard him. And that seems strange to me.
Did you pray a prayer saying, God, reveal yourself to me, I need you?
I've prayed that prayer so many times. And meant it. That's the thing, is that a lot of Christians will be oh, well, you never really believed. And I'll be well, I thought I did. How much belief is belief? And when I prayed the sinner's prayer for the first time, I was 5 years old. And I believed it with my whole heart. And I prayed a similar prayer many times as an adult. And I meant it. I had times in my life where I was not in a good place and I was really desperate for help, and I prayed to God and asked him to show up. And sometimes my life would get better, but not in a way that was definitely God. It was always a coincidence. It was always well, that could be God. If I decided to attribute these good things in my life to God, then I could do that, but it's not definitive, The good things in my life might have something to do with the fact that I work hard and that I hopefully am kind to people. And over years, that stuff adds up. And if God was real, I'd be perfectly willing to admit that he's blessed my life. But what about the people that I met in Uganda? Why is God blessing me and not them? Certainly it can't be because I'm so awesome. That can't be. Yes. You know what I mean? That doesn't sound right.
Well, you are awesome. but I'm
Well-
sure there are plenty of awesome people in Uganda, right?
Yeah, I know so many people, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. Like I've met so many people who, to me, seem so much more deserving of good things than I do, and yet they struggle with things that are just seem so unfair.
Yeah.
And I know the Christian response is like, well, whoever said it would be fair, and I'm just like, well, I don't know, kind of everybody. Like,
right, but don't sell me the all-loving creator of the universe and then try to sell me unfair.
well,
That
I just, yeah, when you start
strange
bringing up
contradiction.
issues like this, when you start bringing up stuff like this, people will go to the God works in mysterious ways thing.
Right.
And then to which I'll say, like, well, what's the difference between a God who works so mysteriously that you can't possibly understand and a God that isn't there? What's the difference?
Yeah, that's right. You've mentioned Uganda several times. There's a few questions I want to ask
Sure.
from that, but my turn quickly for a brief anecdote because it will lead into the questions and it helps set the scene. Our listeners know, certainly those who've listened to more than one episode of our podcast, I had the pleasure of growing up in Zambia. So
I didn't know that.
I come from a missionary family who grew up in Zambia. So my mother trained in the UK as an occupational therapist. And then when she went out to Zambia, she used those skills in hospitals in Zambia, treating people with all sorts of wounds and deformities. And I had the pleasure of seeing her with her patients and seeing the gentleness and the love with which she treated those patients. And sorry, she died about 12 years ago, so my heart is just filling with pride at the moment talking about it.
Oh.
And she was so much a product of her parents. You see the way that her parents were with people, and it's no surprise that my mother was the kind of person that she was. But that was a human showing genuine and very real compassion to other people. And she did that often to her own cost throughout the entirety of her life. Yes, she was also a Christian, but please don't you dare say it was her belief that made her like that. She was like that because that's the person that she absolutely was. And when faced with that kind of suffering that you were talking about, that you saw in Uganda, it's very valid to ask the question, if people can be like this to their fellow man in places like this, where is God? So the question I want to ask you is, did you ask that question of the Christians that you were with who were resident in Uganda, who spent years upon years in Uganda in amongst all this suffering?
Yeah. So the organization I went with was a Christian organization, and they are doing absolutely incredible work. They don't have a ton of funding. They're a small organization, and I was over there to help make some video content that would help them, be able to tell their story a bit better. And at the time, I wasn't honest. I wasn't transparent with them about my doubts. I think they maybe picked up on it a little bit through our conversations, but we didn't talk about it openly. I told them about my doubt later as I was sort of becoming more public, and they sort of indicated, like, yeah, we sort of suspected that you were feeling that stuff. The way that they answer it, like they say that the work that they're doing there, like, they sort of say, like, look at the good things that God is doing. And I sort of look at it and I'm like, well, I think you're doing it. I think it's fantastic work and it needs to be done. And like, I continue to support them financially. I sponsored one of their children for each of my kids, and I believe in what they're doing there. They're actually housing, educating, and feeding 250 orphan children in a structure about the size of my house. And my house is not big, by the way. So they're doing a lot with a little. They attribute what they're doing to God working. But I can't help but notice, and I've seen this my whole life, that very often when, quote unquote, God provides, it comes in the form of someone providing, like a person. And that leads me to feel that, like, if suffering bothers us, then... And we can have, sort of philosophical debates about why it should bother us or why it does bother us. It bothers me. And so one of the things that I've come out of this experience with is a way stronger emphasis on wanting to participate in the alleviation of suffering of other human beings. And I actually don't think you have to go to Uganda to do that. I mean, when I got home, I started researching poverty statistics in my own, city of San Diego. And I discovered that 500,000 people in San Diego are considered what's called food insecure, meaning it's not that they don't have enough money to eat, but they're not always sure that they do. And sometimes they have to go without food for one reason or another. And I've literally never in my life gone hungry because I couldn't afford to eat. And to think that there's 500,000 people in San Diego County that face that choice ever, I mean, that's like shocking to me. So I've become way more involved in those kinds of causes since actually losing my faith, because I no longer have the sort of thought, oh, God will provide. I'm like, nope, I can't trust that anymore. So if suffering bothers me, I need to do something about it. And I can't help but notice that a lot of the people that I've talked to that are atheists and that potentially have left Christianity, some of them, sometimes they're some of the most generous and philanthropic people I know. And they've really thought about morality. And secular humanism is a great example of people that have come out of religion or have chosen not to believe in a religion, but have wanted to make the world a better place for people that are suffering. And I just love that.
Thank you. That was beautiful to hear. That really was. And we know, Andrew and I both know people who have gone out of their way to help others since leaving the faith. It's not a new thing, what you've just said. So it's great to hear it independently from another source.
What you just said about human value, about secular humanism, about humanism in general, but I would, I guess, identify as a secular humanist. And it occurs to me that one of the big questions that we haven't asked you that seems part and parcel of your answer there that could probably use a little more unwinding is I don't know if you had to deal with this, but when I walked away from Christianity, I had to answer the question for myself about human value.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a Christian, I could just say, well, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And it's this very pat answer, and you've got this card in your billfold. And whenever someone does something wrong, you can say, turn the other cheek. And that's on one side of the card. And, do unto others is on the other side of the card. And you can just go about your merry way, right? It's you can just say, well, here's the lodge I belong to, and here's what we believe. As a non-Christian, if you're going to take the world seriously as a naturalist and a humanist, you have to answer these questions, and that takes some real soul searching. If you,
it's very complicated.
Yeah,
and very often, I'm sure you experience this. When you leave faith, a Christian will ask you, "Well, then, how do you ground your morality?"
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yep.
And that's the question you're getting at, right?
Yes, exactly.
And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. There's the classic debate of is morality objective or subjective? And I'm always fascinated by the fact that Christians are so ardent about morality being objective, because they're like, well, no, there are things that are just right and wrong objectively. And I accepted that when I was a Christian, but since walking away from Christianity, I sort of go, okay, is that true? And what's our evidence for that? And generally, when you ask for evidence, a Christian will say, well, you just know. Like, we just know. And then to which an atheist or someone who's doubting, a skeptic, might say, well, I can't help but notice that, like, all these different cultures in the world have different moral views. So how can morality be objective? To which the Christian apologist will say, oh, well, morality is objective. They're all just wrong.
Right.
And, and then they'll usually bring up Nazis. At some point, Nazis will come up, because they'll say, well, if the Nazis had won World War II, they would have just said that their actions were right. And, if that became consensus, does that make it right? And it's, of course, that argument is a trap, because what they want you to do is they want you to choose between agreeing with them or agreeing with the Nazis, which is so manipulative. But anyway, my approach to that is like, well, actually, we're the U.S. is the only country that ever dropped nuclear weapons on another country, and we did it on 2 civilian cities.
Said it over and over. Yep.
And so, like, do you think that was wrong? Because I think that if we had lost If the Japanese had beat us, I think that we would all be living in a world where we would recognize that that was wrong. So to me, this whole conversation indicates there is a massive amount of subjectivity in our moral beliefs. The only way that I can see that you can ground morality in anything objective is if we all agree on something. So if we can agree that human well-being is the goal. So first off, like, if you say the word right and wrong or like good or bad, those words don't have any meaning unless they're referencing a goal of some kind. So the example I like to use is if you're choosing between a car and a horse, it's like, which is better? Well, if you're trying to get from point A to point B cheaply, easily, reliably, then a car is better. But if you're trying to go up this winding mountainside, then a horse is better. Mm-hmm. If it's on this little path or whatever, there's situations in which a horse might be a better choice. So you have to pick a goal before good or bad or better or worse means anything. So, Christians will say the goal of, morality, that the goal for morality is that we do what God commands. To which I'll say, like, well, which commands? Because that's not clear. But regardless of that, I would say human well-being is the goal that I have chosen to ground my morality. I believe that every time I make a choice, I have the ability as a conscious creature and a moral agent to sort of try and decide what decisions can I make and which ones will benefit, which ones will get me closer to more human well-being and further away from suffering for as many people as possible. And now I recognize that choice to make human well-being the goal, that's a subjective choice. Mm-hmm. But once you've made that choice, then you can make objective claims based on that goal. So you can say, like, I think that killing people objectively is wrong given the goal of human well-being, right? Yeah. And so technically it's subjective morality, but it's based on a principle that if everyone can agree that human well-being is the goal, and most people do, that consensus forms a basis on which you can build some objective truths about morality. And that's how I think the world works. And that's how I view it, and that's how I, rationalize it. And plenty of people will make arguments with me on that because it gets technical, right? They're like, well, why should you value human well-being? And
so that one's a little hard, isn't it? Because you have to dig into things like we've evolved to be social creatures. And
agreed. Yeah.
If we didn't place human thriving first, well, we just wouldn't be.
Well, that's the thing is that if you don't value human well-being, if you're a member of a species that doesn't value its own existence, then you won't exist. And so the fact that we're here, there may have been human beings that didn't value their own existence. We don't know. We can't talk to them because they're not around anymore.
No. Right.
And I know some people bring up evolution like, well, what is the evolutionary benefit to altruism and morality? Like one person sacrificing themselves for another, that doesn't seem like it would have an evolutionary benefit. And yet we hold that behavior in high regard. And to that I say, well, the only reason that thought is making sense to you is because you're ignoring the fact that we're such social creatures. And that's fundamental to our existence and our survival in our society, that we don't live in isolation. For a long time, we lived in tribes that were, smaller than 150 people, and we evolved in that setting.
Right. And not every act of sacrifice or altruism has to be the ultimate sacrifice, right, where we have given a life or given standing in a community, or we've saved someone from a wasting disease and now we die from it ourselves. Not really a call to COVID-19, by the way. Yeah. I'm just saying that there is almost an implied equivocation when you're offered but altruism doesn't seem to be an act of survival. What's being smuggled in there is the idea that altruism must lead to death. And yeah. that is not the case. Altruism, and it is not necessarily the case that self-sacrifice is sacrifice for one individual, right? So we have a standing army in the U.S. of for 500,000, military troops, whatever the number is today. Sorry if I'm off. I'm not off by like all that much, but let's say it's 400,000. Well, that's 400,000 people who are saying that they're willing to sacrifice themselves for 330 million. And so altruism is not a one-to-one relationship, and it's not always a sacrifice unto death.
Yeah.
And so I don't really buy it.
Yeah. And another thing is that you actually see sort of prototypical versions of morality in some animals. So
Sure.
There's an example that Jordan Peterson uses of alpha male wolves. And so when two male wolves in a pack, when they are having a dispute over their dominance, they fight, they wrestle, they bite at each other. And then whoever, realizes they're losing will typically roll over and show their neck and allow, give the more dominant wolf a chance to rip its throat out. And the more dominant wolf does not do that because it's acting on the instinct that, hey, I should probably not rip this, this weaker wolf's throat out. Now, you could imagine that maybe it's thinking, oh, I might need this wolf later on. I might need him to help. And if I can just get him to submit to me, maybe that's better than just killing him. But I don't think we believe that the wolf is like rationally articulating that. But it's just acting that behavior out. And so it has behavior that it's just instinctively programmed with that evolved over time because it had an evolutionary benefit. And it's acting out a type of morality without articulating why. And so you could imagine as human beings evolved that we may have acted out similar things. We didn't know why we were doing it, but it had a benefit. And so that instinct or that behavior stuck. And then over time, as we became more conscious, we began to ask questions like, well, why do we act the way we do? And we began telling stories. And that's why you get hero myths. And that's why people started to tell stories about like, well, if we really value someone who's going to protect our tribe or whatever, what's the ultimate version of that? Well, maybe, I know you mentioned that, it's not always self-sacrifice, but say that's like the ultimate version of that. And, someone is laying their life down for the tribe. And then they start telling stories about that. And then they imagine what the ultimate version of that might be. Mm-hmm. And pretty soon you have the beginnings of a belief in God. And so all of these things and proto-morality and morality and, belief in God, that they all are connected in my view.
Sure.
So did you ever have that bizarre situation where you went to sleep at night and you were worried about how your morality would be shaped the next morning when you woke up?
No.
How you'd be able to control yourself to behave?
No. And that's the thing. I've heard I'm sure you've heard this too. Like I've heard some Christians say, well, if I didn't believe in God, I would just be out there murdering people and stealing. And I'm like, but you wouldn't though. No. That's nonsense.
But if you are that rare person, stay in church, please.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I in studying these things, I just believe really firmly that when it comes to morality, we have these moral intuitions that are a combination of genetics and culture. Yeah. And we act those things out way before we're able to articulate why. Mm-hmm. And then the articulation follows. It's like we start to try and reason about why we're acting the way we're already acting. I'm pretty convinced the behavior precedes the reason, not the other way around.
We're doing a cack-handed job of retrospective justification.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's called motivated reasoning, I think. Yes. If you've read this, there's this book called Thinking in Bets by this woman named, I think it's Annie Downs or something like that. And she's one of the best poker players in the world. And she wrote this book about poker, but it has so many implications for psychology and how we think and how we reason and why we think the way we do. And it's just brilliant.
Excellent. Now, I'd like to go a little bit more on morality thing, but before we get there, I'd like to change subject. And sure. I've heard you on multiple podcasts talking about your story and having some really interesting conversations. And I really appreciate you doing what you've done, and you've opened yourself up to some really challenging conversations and had some really genuinely interesting conversations. And I really liked one of the conversations you had with Sean McDowell as well. It was a really great conversation. But you're not the only high-profile Christian who's come out and publicly renounce their faith, or whatever phrase people want to use as a preference there.
Sure.
But you're the only one who's really put yourself out there, and most of the others have kept very, very quiet and gone low profile. And I know, whose name I won't say, of one individual specifically who was ended up at a meetup with people in a Facebook group that I'm part of, and I saw the photo of them meeting up together, and it was really good to see him with a group of people and talking through things. But I do know this individual specifically was told, keep a low profile, don't put yourself out there for your own mental health and your own sanity. So I guess I've got two questions here.
Sure.
Do you understand why people who have done that are keeping low profile and staying out of the public eye? And why have you done it differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I agree with you. Most people that have gone through this process have decided to keep a low profile. In fact, I know a lot of people who have sort of walked away from their faith, privately and not said anything public at all. So there's a number of people that are in Christian culture that don't believe. Some of whom have told me privately that they don't believe, and they're still active in their, Christian roles because that's the career that they've built, and they would be incurring just a huge cost as far as their personal lives to be upfront about what they're thinking. I think it's the cost that keeps people from putting themselves out there this way. When all of your social circles and all of your income and all of when your whole life is wrapped up in Christianity, there's tremendous motivation not to rock the boat. And what I'm doing is definitely rocking the boat. And I've thought a lot about why I'm doing this. And I have periods of time where I sort of go off social media. I haven't really been on Instagram as much the last couple of weeks because typically as I'm thinking through these things, if I come across a subject where I'm not exactly sure what I think, it gives me pause. And so I get quiet for a week or two and I work it through. And then once I feel like I've got that sort of sorted out, then I start talking again. But what keeps me going is just the fact that I speak to so many people all the time who are in the same place as me, who are doubting, who are questioning, and they feel like they don't have anyone to talk to about it. They don't feel like they can be honest because they feel like they're going to incur a tremendous amount of personal cost. Whether that's relationships or finances or their, the social, circles or career or whatever. And there's so many people that want to talk about this stuff, but it's scary to take that leap if you're ensconced in Christianity. And so I feel motivated by those people because I can't tell you how many messages I've gotten, direct messages on Instagram or Twitter or emails of people that have said that what they've heard me talk about has caused them to feel encouraged and hopeful that they can walk this thing out without being afraid anymore, that they're not the only one who has questions and doubts, that they're not crazy. And to see people sort of feel empowered by me telling my story or sharing my thoughts, like that's a huge motivator for me. I spent 15 or 16 years in Christian music, and what motivated me during that time is I loved seeing people's lives transformed in positive ways. And I still love that. And so for me, if I can do work that allows people to experience new levels of freedom, where they don't feel weighed down by some dogmatic religion that is keeping them from living the life that they want to live, and especially if it's an identity thing, like for people that are gay or bi or trans. I have a dear friend, who privately came out to me after I shared this stuff because they knew that I would be a safe place. And it's so telling that, like, when this person thought I was a Christian, they weren't comfortable telling me the deepest truth about themselves. But as soon as I came out and said, I'm not a Christian anymore, they were like, oh, now I feel like I can share this. And that was just powerful for me. So,
yeah.
And this is, this year I've been openly affirming the LGBTQ community. And that's been a source of a lot of joy for me, that I feel like I can have the freedom to do that and be like, no, like I want this community to have all the rights that I have. I want their position in the world to be normalized and not discriminated against. And and participating in the process of that community becoming more established in our culture in a way that's normalized and accepted and appreciated and loved. Like, what a joy that is. And that's not something I felt like I was free to do when I was, a part of Christian culture. So all of that are factors for me. And I'm sorry if I went on kind of long there, but that's the sort of reason this stuff feels positive and hopeful for me.
Bless you, John. That wasn't the answer I was expecting, but I'm so glad you said it. But touching on some of the people that you mentioned there, obviously we're not going to ask for names.
Sure.
But I think what we should do is at least acknowledge that for people who don't feel that they've got the freedom to be honest about their own questions and doubts, or even maybe now lack of belief, there must be a terrible pressure on them if they're in a role of ministry where,
yes,
as you said, their income, their livelihood relies on it, but they're now demanded to support and promote actively something that they can no longer accept or maybe can't even believe anymore. There must be a terrible emotional pressure on those people.
Yeah, there are definitely people who question God and doubt God, but have spent so much time in Christian culture and maybe they're established in a career that sort of puts them in a place where they don't have a lot of options. And I can imagine a lot of scenarios, but I actually know of some specifically. And, there's people out there that are pastors and have pastored their whole life and then come to a place where they're just like, I don't even know if I believe this stuff I'm preaching about. If you've been a pastor your whole life, say 20, 30, 40 adult years, and you end up in this place where like, this is the only career option I have at this point.
Right.
Gosh, I mean, like, I feel so much empathy for those people. Mm-hmm. And truly, like, if they continue to pastor and if they sort of process this stuff publicly, I don't hold them in disregard. I don't think less of them. They're in a tremendously difficult position. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say to those people is like, walk this stuff out as best you know how. Focus on caring for people. And, for a time that may mean that you continue to use religious language to do that. But you may find as time goes on that you have an increasing desire to be more transparent. You may find that you have avenues that present themselves to you where you can continue to help people and care about people that have in ways that maybe are less religious. But for the most part, pastors get into pastoring because they care about people. I'm not one of these atheists that thinks like, oh, like any Christian is an ignorant fool and, they're participating in the oppression of society. Like most people that get into pastoring do so because they care about people. And yeah. I would just say, if you're starting to doubt this stuff, do your research, read a lot, reach out to people that maybe you feel like would be able to handle your doubts, and continue to love people like you've always done, and let that become the thing. And I think that's a path forward.
Absolutely. The whole concept of secular grace and being great to other people is something that I think we should all embrace. And
I love that. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and this exists in the atheist community. Not every atheist is a loudmouth, shouty atheist. Although I have been that kind of atheist at times. I do sometimes be like that. There are times when I lose patience, and yeah. there was a long period of time where to suggest that I never truly believed was instant rage for me. I knew of no other way to respond to that comment. So,
well, there's on both sides of this belief and unbelief thing, there are some individuals who are just arrogant and mean-spirited on both sides of the conversation. And on both sides, there's also people that are thoughtful and loving and really genuine. I would just say for everyone out there, like, regardless of your place on that spectrum of belief or unbelief, maybe reach out to some people that believe things differently than you do. And find people that think differently than you, but carry that same sense of, like you said, grace and kindness and openness. They're out there for those that are listening. If you're a Christian and you don't feel like you've interacted with a nice atheist, then I present 2 nice atheists, or I guess 3 if I include myself.
Oh, but you must include yourself, John.
But reach out to. There are people that are non-religious that are really wonderful people. Reach out and get to know some. And if you're someone who's not a believer yourself, and if you feel like the only Christians or Muslims or people that subscribe to Judaism, if you don't feel like you've ever interacted with kind and loving religious people, then look a little harder. They're certainly there. And my life has only gotten richer as I've walked out the journey of seeking out people that are different than me and getting to know them truly with a genuine desire to understand their perspective. And my life's only gotten better the more I've done that.
That's really great to hear. I did poll for some Christians on the Unbelievable Facebook group. So I got a couple of questions to come to you from there. So let's get those ones done now. So the first question was, do you feel that your faith has broadened and become more robust?
That's a tricky question because it depends on what you mean by faith, I guess. I mean, I think I actually deconstructed my faith all the way down to the ground. And since then, I've been sort of building something new back up. And I sort of continue to believe that it is better to know the truth than not, I think. And my suspicion is that God is either not real, or if he is real, he's so much more mysterious than we give him credit for. And I suspect if he's real, he's also casting a much wider net than we realize. And so what I mean by that is essentially like, I think God is either not there or is so universal that the specifics of Christianity almost don't even apply. Something like that.
Okay, I think I like that answer. That's an answer that I would endorse. So
cool.
The other question I had was, do you feel any responsibility to bring out of the wrong path those you may have influenced to go down it?
Yes and no. I feel like the only responsibility that I actively like shouldering is pushing people towards asking the questions that are in their hearts. So for someone who is a strong Christian and you feel like your faith and your community are like a positive thing in your life, and you're walking that out in ways that are healthy and not harmful to the people around you, then like, good for you. I'm not trying to push you away from that. Like, that's awesome. But if you're someone who is doubting and you don't feel like you have the freedom to doubt, if you're someone who's in a Christian community and you don't feel like it's a healthy thing for you, if you're someone who subscribes to a bunch of beliefs that are doing harm to you or the people around you, if I can help give you a push to look at that, then I want to do that. And so I feel responsible insofar as I hope I'm encouraging people to ask harder questions and have harder conversations with the goal of getting to a healthier place in life. And so in that sense, I'm not concerned about the effects that I'm having on people when I talk about these things, because I mean, I've said this before and I continue to believe it, that the truth is not afraid of questions.
Absolutely.
And you can't convince me that it's a bad thing to seek truth. And so whenever I have a Christian that's sort of coming at me and saying I shouldn't be saying this stuff, I'm just like, all I'm telling people is to seek the truth. And that shouldn't be a threat to God if he's there. Because if he's there, then that would be true.
Kind of related to that, as well as being on quite a large number of podcasts, you've also become the subject of quite a large number of podcast episodes as well. In fact, I've got one in the can.
I try not to Google myself too much.
Yeah, it's probably a dangerous thing, but spoiler, I've actually got one in the can, which I recorded with Dave, the Graceful Atheist, where we talked about Christian responses to people who come out. And so inevitably your name came up and we looked at some of the Christian responses that we've seen to your story. obviously it wasn't all just about you.
Sure.
Let's just just keep your ego in check.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm not the center of this particular universe. So yeah.
But there was
but we did put a tracker on your car.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a tracker on me. It's called my phone because I'm assuming everything I'm doing is tracked anyways at this point.
No, yeah, it is. If you're going to do a crime, dear listeners, leave your phone at home before you go out and do it.
Yeah.
So that one's in the can, and that one's going to come out shortly. So the listeners will have listened to that by the time they hear this one. But in the research for that, I think it was Braxton Hunter who said this. I could be wrong. I said that I watched multiple YouTube videos talking about people deconstructing, but the phrase that really jumped out at me, and I'm paraphrasing it here, was people like yourself, namely you, Jon, who are public Christians who do a public deconstruction and come out and then talk about their lack of faith. They have more of an impact on Christians than the YouTube atheists, so people like Andrew and myself who just shout about our atheism on podcasts. Is that something that you accept is potentially true?
I guess. I suspect that would have a shelf life. I think for a period of time, people might be drawn to my story, but eventually, like, life moves on, and I think like 5 years from now, I'm not sure that the idea that I used to believe in God and now I don't. I just don't know how significant that'll be for very many people. I think it might have a flash in the pan effect. I guess there's some truth to that in a way. So do you feel like he was alluding to me having a responsibility that I was not factoring in, or?
I don't think so. The way I interpreted the comment was, as him being a Christian leader, it was a concern for him, for the people that he is responsible for the faith of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say to that, like whenever Christians talk about Islam, they love to bring on former Muslims who converted to Christianity. And so, leaving one faith is something that's celebrated as long as it's not your faith.
Mm-hmm.
Something. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say there's something a little egotistical about claiming the responsibility for someone else's faith.
Agree.
There's something slightly, it's not terribly broken, but it's slightly broken. I'm not saying that we don't influence each other, but I think it's worth carefully drawing the line about what influence each of us has over the other when we're talking about adults who are in roughly power equal relationships, right? So anyway, it was just a thought.
Well, and sort of my sort of last thing I'll say on that is that I spent 15 or 16 years publicly talking about my views, my spiritual views, and everyone in Christianity was clearly fine with that. But once I felt differently, then I started to have Christians tell me that I shouldn't be talking about it. So the reason that I continue, one of the reasons that I continue, or that I wanted to do it publicly in the beginning, is that I just felt like if I didn't speak up publicly and if I just kept this to myself, that I would be participating in a culture of shame. That I'd be participating in a culture that says it's not okay to doubt, it's not okay to question, and if you don't subscribe to the same views that we do, then you need to sit down and shut up. And I try not to use harsh, sort of aggressive language when I'm talking about this stuff. I think that's abhorrent because it's essentially saying agree or be silent. And that's totalitarianism. Yeah. Like, that's the very thing that, at least in America, like, that's something that politically Christian, conservatives would associate with the far left or something,
or stacking the Supreme Court.
Sure. Yeah. So I just think, I think it's important in any community to be open to dissenting voices. And to their credit, there's actually a lot of Christian apologists or theologians or thinkers who have reached out to me and have been very kind. Like Justin Brierley, super, super kind guy, and has had me on his show twice. Sean McDowell, who you mentioned earlier, I mean, he and I have actually become good friends through this whole thing. And we actually go running on the beach. Well, that that actually did sound kind of gay. But no, but
in a cool way, obviously.
We get together, we go for a run every once in a while, like maybe once a month or something like that. And he's become a real friend. Another Christian apologist named Jonathan McClatchy, who lives out in the on the East Coast.
We've had Jonathan on for a couple of episodes.
Oh, right on. He's become someone who I've corresponded with a ton because he's willing to challenge me quite a bit. And I've found that actually useful because if I have a position on something, I could bring it up to Jonathan and I know he'll offer me the strongest opposing position I could hope for.
Right.
And so it's been helpful for me to sort of contend with him in a friendly but firm way, to be able to be sure that what I'm thinking isn't just the result of some sort of ex-Christian echo chamber, you know?
Right.
So I think all of that has been helpful.
Yeah, I do like Jonathan and the way that he is more than willing to go out there and engage with with people who are very different to him. We had him on and we had a good chat, and then I issued a challenge. Well, it wasn't necessarily a challenge, but then we had him back again with another friend of the show, Brian Blaze, who's very much a sort of a scientific mind, and let the two of them go at it. And that was
I bet that was interesting.
It was very interesting, and it was a case of I introduced them and then stood back and almost turned my mic off and let the two of them have their conversation.
Yeah, Brian, his background is a PhD with an emphasis in neuroscience. And in Jonathan's background, if I recall correctly, Jonathan, if you're listening and I don't get this exactly right, my apologies, but I think his background is a PhD in biology.
Yeah, it's molecular biology specifically.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that was a good episode. It really was. And I think that some correspondence has continued after that, even between the two of them.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, one of the things I respect about Jonathan is he actually puts himself out there for people who are believers that are struggling with doubts. And he spends time on like one-on-one Zoom calls with some of these people. And like, it's one thing to do that publicly where there could be a public thing where somehow he's getting notoriety from doing it, but he does it privately and quietly. And he's spending time with people one-on-one legitimately because he cares and wants to offer them the best. Like the way he describes it to me is he says, if people are going to leave Christianity, I want them to know, to experience all the best arguments for Christianity before walking away. And
I think that's right too.
And I'm like, I don't know, I respect that a lot. Sure. And so he's been working on me for months.
Well, and I get the sense from Jonathan that he's not likely to give up easy. So.
No, our first YouTube conversation with him and I was 2 hours of him hitting me with things that I was not prepared to contend with. And not, I mean, not in an unfriendly way at all, but I was just like, wow, you know a lot more than me about this stuff. And, we continue to have that type of back and forth where he's very knowledgeable. His memory is incredible.
It is, yeah. He's very academic, isn't he?
Very academic, yeah. So I appreciate having someone like him to contend with because I feel like it allows me to refine my thinking on things.
If you'll permit me asking a personal question, Jon,
sure,
did your family follow you on your journey out of faith?
Well, my wife and I have very similar views. We're both pastors' kids. We both come from really, really similar backgrounds. And so we're on that journey together, thankfully. And I've spoken with people who are in a situation where that's not the case for them, where they are wrestling with doubts and questions and their spouse is not. And that's very challenging. I'm really grateful that's not the position I'm in. And I have a lot of empathy for people who are in that position. For us, my wife and I are very much on the same page. My kids are 3 years old and 2 years old, so they're not quite at that place yet. But the way that they're playing into it is we are always asking ourselves the question of how are we raising our kids? What are we teaching them? Like what are we going to tell them as they get older? All of their cousins and their aunts and uncles and their grandparents are Christian. And, at some point there's going to be a difference that becomes obvious.
And they're going to ask you that,
Mm-hmm.
Because I kept it all secret to myself, I eventually got the question from my daughter, Daddy, why aren't you coming to church anymore?
Mm.
And
what did you
I knew
say?
It was coming. I had to be honest, there was no there is no let out when your child asks you a question like that. The only option is to be honest. You gain absolutely nothing by lying to your child in a situation like that. So I just said, honey, I'm unable to believe anymore. And it was as simple as that. I thought more would come from that, but it was left at that.
How old was she when you had that conversation?
I'm trying to think now. She's 16 now, 10, 11, 12, that sort of age.
Yeah.
And she knows what I do now.
Then.
Yeah, she knows what I do now, and she's okay with what I do now. And we don't have in-depth conversations about it. She knows what I think, and if she wants to have that conversation, she'll choose to have that conversation. Again, I gain nothing by trying to force conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I've got I'm in the place you are, John. I've got a 15-month-old, so she's a little younger than your youngest. But in our extended family that lives here around us, we've got 4 Pentecostal preachers in our and it's the kind of thing that I'm sure you're familiar with. At the family gatherings, everybody gets together and holds hands and says prayers and that sort of thing. And the talk is very often religious because they're all true believers. Not used as an epithet, right? Not used in any diminutive way, but these are people who really believe the things they believe. And we are in a place that because their belief is so strong, because they are so convinced about not only their own need to be righteous, but about their call to preach that to others and to try to convert and to try to, I don't think indoctrination. In fact, here's my little girl now.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about allowing them to do the things that will ultimately indoctrinate her into Christianity. And it is not an easy path.
Yeah. I think, my plan is this, and this is actually a universal enough thought that maybe this is a good place for us to leave it, this conversation. My thought on it is that as my kids get older, I'm going to spend time one-on-one with both of them. And at some point, this stuff will come up. We'll talk about the fact that life is mysterious, and we don't know what the future holds. We don't know what exists outside the boundaries of our senses. And there's a lot of people out there that say that they do know. And my suspicion is that we don't know. If I can encourage my kids to have a wonder about the world around us, whether it's, the natural world or supernatural or whatever, then I want to encourage them to have a sense of wonder and to be comfortable with the reality that there might be questions to which we don't have answers. And if I can do that, then hopefully that'll set them up to be able to make decisions on their own without me giving them a specific sort of belief set, but just a general approach.
How to think and not what to think.
Yeah, how to think and not what to think. That's brilliant. Yeah.
So was it unsettling, John? Because you were a yak, you said earlier, the same as myself. Was it that transition from absolute certainty of how the world was to acceptance of a significant quantity of uncertainty? Was that an unsettling step to take, or did you embrace it?
Yes. That was certainly unsettling. I definitely felt like I went from having this sense of certainty about life and about the fact that there was a God that was providing for me, to a sense that I did not have any certainty about that. And life felt a lot more dangerous after that, a lot scarier. But yeah, it definitely was hard to lose that certainty, but I also felt like I was gaining a level of honesty with myself that I didn't have before. And that felt worth it. I think if you ask people, do you value truth? They will tend to say yes. And I think that I would rather live in a knowledge of the truth than a comfortable illusion. And I think most people would agree with that, even if the comfortable illusion is quite comfortable.
Yeah. We've talked around harm and caring for other people. So in your newfound worldview and what you're working through, how does that extend to non-human animals?
Oh, yeah. So this is an interesting thing. I I follow this YouTuber named Cosmic Skeptic. His real name's Alex O'Connor, and he's actually in the UK. And he went vegan a while back and has been studying animal ethics. And I know Peter Singer is an influence of his, and he's someone that has written about animal ethics in a book called Animal Liberation, and I think a few other places. It's a really interesting aspect of morality because as a Christian, I always saw this very hard dividing line between humans and animals. And, human beings are made in the image of God, and animals are basically here to serve us, I guess, and for us to use how we see fit, more or less. But once you step away from a Christian worldview and recognize that there's not such a hard dividing line between animals and humans, and in fact, when you look at genetics, like we are 97% identical with chimpanzees, and I think we're something like 60% genetically identical to I can't remember I need to find a better stat for this, but it was something ridiculous. It was like ants or something. It was like some non-mammalian thing. It's like we have so much in common with the animal kingdom. We are a part of the animal kingdom. We're just essentially the most evolved. I don't even know if that is a correct way to say it, but we are evolved animals. And when you realize that, and you go, well, I value human beings. I don't want to do anything that causes them unnecessary suffering. And you start to ask the question, well, why would I only value human beings? Why wouldn't I also extend at least some of that thought to other animals? And are there ways in which I can live my life that cause less suffering to animals? And when you look at the way that we manufacture food in the modern world, we treat animals horribly. And for most people don't want to see that stuff. They'll actively avoid learning about it. I certainly did. I was like, I don't want to see that stuff. I like a good burger. But it's caused me to rethink that. And Alex O'Connor, the guy I mentioned earlier, he put this video up on YouTube recently that was called something about cognitive dissonance. It was basically pointing out the fact that people will decry situations where a dog gets kicked, but they're totally comfortable with the treatment of animals in the meat processing industry, for instance. Mm. And it's a case of cognitive dissonance where you're really holding two contradictory views at the same time. I felt challenged by that. I think going all out vegan would be very difficult for me. So I'm experimenting with going vegetarian first. I've been doing it now for almost a week. And it really hasn't been that difficult to change. There's so many products out there that make it easier than it used to be. Beyond Meat and Impossible Foods are two examples of companies that are making plant-based meat substitutes that are actually delicious. So I'm starting there, and I'm starting by not eating meat with the goal of inching my way towards veganism, hopefully at some point, because it seems like if I want to have a coherent way of living in the world where I truly want to minimize the amount of suffering that I cause other conscious creatures, then I feel like I should try to extend that to animals as much as I can.
Thank you. That's a great conversation to have, I think. And Alex, I admire Alex. We had him on our sister podcast, Proscenium, back in January this year, having a conversation about veganism.
Oh, cool.
And the question I'd like to ask you is, could you imagine yourself coming to this position while you were still a Christian?
I don't feel like the incentive would be there because there's this hard dividing line between human beings and animals. At least that's how I saw it. And it was sort of like, oh, well, if an animal is suffering, I mean, obviously we don't want to cause unnecessary suffering, but like a very common response, if you bring up this, arguments for veganism, a very common response might be, well, look at the animal kingdom. When a lion kills an antelope, there's some suffering going on there, right? So it's natural. It's part of the natural world. And I would say to that, yeah, that's true, but that's not what's happening in our modern sort of meat industry. We are systemically causing suffering. And a lion killing an antelope, if a lion doesn't eat meat, they're not genetically and biologically able to eat plants as far as I know. And so, they'll literally die if they don't kill the occasional antelope. But we have the option of not doing that. And so, in the society that we live today, with the bodies that we have the ability to live without eating meat. we have the ability to live without consuming animal products of any kind, in fact. And so if that's an option that's available to us, then maybe that's something we should consider. And I think that's a personal choice, but it's one that I feel compelled to explore.
Yeah. And kudos to you for doing it. And the reason why I asked that question, as you know, is because I saw you commented to Alex on Twitter. And because of the interaction that we had with Alex, I follow him on Twitter as well.
Oh, cool.
And as little as a year ago, I was not only a confirmed meat eater. If I went out to a restaurant and saw a vegan symbol next to a meal, I would not choose that meal out of a matter of principle. So that's the kind of person I was. And I said to myself, I could accept it for reasons of diet and for personal health, but I couldn't accept it for the morality reason, for the animal treatment reasons. And Alex came on and I said, and I opened up with, why should I be vegan? And he came straight out with the treatment of animals. And within 10 seconds, I realized that my thing of I couldn't be sold on this for the treatment of animals just wasn't going to wash. And Alex did. He, if you even go and listen to the episode, he really hit us hard with it. And he just wouldn't stop punching. And it was a fabulous conversation that we had with him. And after we had the conversation, I said to my wife, you need to listen to this episode. If you don't listen to my podcast at all, you need to listen to this one. And she did. And we had the conversation with it as a family. And we agreed from that moment onwards, we would not buy meat and we would actively seek to avoid buying any animal products at all, full stop. And so we finished all the animal products that we had in the house and we've not bought any animal products for food consumption since then. And that includes dairy. We've gone full on vegan.
Yeah, dairy is the hardest one, I think.
It is difficult. There are alternatives, but I love my cheese. And
cheese is that's the one for me too, man. I'm just like,
it is my problem. I'm not missing the meat. I'm genuinely not missing the meat, but there are so many gorgeous blue cheeses and I genuinely miss it. Yeah. But this is the commitment that we've decided to make, and that's the price I need to pay for this commitment. It's not like there aren't other really nice foods to eat, because there are plenty of really nice foods to eat. So it's not like I'm missing something I really like for something that's horrible. I'm missing something I really like for something else that I now really like.
Yeah. And there's a lot of options out there that didn't used to exist. So and I've also contemplated, and I need to do more research on this, but I think there are potentially, I mean, again, if Alex were on this conversation, he might disagree with me on this. I'm interested in investigating whether there are ways that you could buy certain types of, say, like cheese, if it was from like a farm where there, there was things done in a very sort of naturalistic way. I'm sure if I dig deeper into that, there's probably problems.
We did exactly that search, and
did you?
Or rather, my wife did that search, and
what did you find?
She said it's marginally better, but there's still problems. You're better off avoiding it completely.
Yeah, I kind of thought that's where that might lead.
Yeah, it's because of what the dairies have to do in order to keep their cows producing milk. That's the main problem area.
Right. Yeah.
So we did try, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Well.
So. Thank you for that, John. So we've got just the one question now, unless Andrew wants to jump on quickly with a question. But the final question for all our guests, and you have been a genuinely wonderful guest, and I could easily carry this on for another hour, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
Do you have a favorite Bible character? Would you like to share them, and who are they?
Yeah, I do. I think my favorite Bible character is actually Jacob. Because I love
Jacob and Esau.
Well, yeah, and specifically the story of Jacob wrestling the angel.
Okay, yes.
Because for me, that is such a beautiful metaphor of what it's like to grapple with the idea of the divine. I feel like there's something about life that feels that way, like you're contending with something that's bigger than you and you don't entirely know what it is. And it leaves you sort of wounded, and that just feels true in life. There's this sort of underlying like deep sadness that I've felt my whole life, that it's always sort of there, and I can call it up whenever I want to. When I'm happy, I still sense it, and when I'm sad, I sense it a lot. There just seems to be this fundamental thing in life that feels like something like a wound, and I don't know what that is, but I think we all have it. And at the same time, I noticed that I actually think life can be quite beautiful. And so life is also a blessing. And I know that's religious terminology to say blessing, but it feels like the only word that fits to me. And so I love the story of Jacob wrestling the angel because he wrestled with the divine. He didn't know what he was getting into. And he came away with both a blessing and a limp. And I'm content thinking of that as a completely metaphorical story, but it feels like it rings true when I think about life and what life feels like and the experience of being alive. And that's kind of why that's my favorite character, my favorite Bible story.
That may be our best answer so far, Matthew.
You say that every time you.
Okay, but look, every guy listening to this podcast has only had one question the whole time, right? They all want to know the same thing, and they're wondering why it hasn't been asked, because the vast majority of guys listening to this podcast have picked up a guitar at some point, and or played air guitar in the mirror or whatever, right? And they just want to know one thing, John. They've been waiting for this question.
Sure.
Are Christian groupies better than non-Christian groupies? That's all they want to know.
Well,
you can feel totally free not to.
So here's how I'll answer that. I think that I don't think that anyone gets into Christian music for the groupies, and I think that if they did, they would be disappointed. And you can interpret that answer however you want, but probably any way that you interpret it is somewhat accurate.
So we are actually not a vicarious, salacious podcast, and I will let that lie.
Yeah, the fuller discussion on that is behind our paywall.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Pay no attention to the cover art on the paywall. Pay attention. Right. John, it has been a genuine pleasure.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, guys. It was a great conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, John. I really, really did enjoy this. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's been great. I'm looking forward to hearing you on other podcasts. I know of at least one other that you've been in contact with, so I'm looking forward to that. So keep doing what you're doing, John. I really admire you, really admire what it is you're doing. I've loved the answers to your questions. Thank you once again. I've really enjoyed these last 2 hours.
Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. By the way, folks, if you're listening and you'd like to get in touch, John, how can our listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, probably the best place is Instagram. I'm just Jon Steingard on Instagram. And I'm on, actually sort of recently, I'm on Twitter a lot too, because in the last few months dealing with this transition in my life, Twitter has become a really fun place to hash out some of these ideas. And so Instagram or Twitter are sort of the two places that I spend the most time.
And are there any projects? You mentioned the documentary in Uganda. Are there any other things that we can link to in the show notes?
Well, not so much right now. I know normally if you have a guest, like a lot of times they'll have like a book to promote or something like that. I am working on some stuff. I've very much been in the thick of like whatever story I end up telling. I've very much been living it the last few months. I've been a little bit slow to sort of like try and capitalize on that by like making a product or anything like that. Gotcha. Although I have been gathering my thoughts in written form just to sort of to know where I'm at with things. And so that is shaping up to be something that could potentially be a book at some point. But at the moment, no. At the moment, but the documentary I did in Uganda is called Batwa, Batwa, and it's on my YouTube channel. It wasn't actually anywhere publicly for the longest time, and it wasn't until I started talking about the Batwa in the context of my story here that I realized I should probably put it on YouTube. So it hasn't been viewed that many times on YouTube because it hasn't been there for very long. So
we will link to it though.
We'll find it
and Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah, anyone that's interested in watching that, it's just called Batwa. That's the documentary.
Well, we will make sure and put everything that we can into the show notes. And
cool.
Listeners, if you would like to get in touch about this show or any past show, if you'd like to agree or disagree, as always, you can hit us up at reasonpress@gmail.com.
You have been listening to a podcast by Reason Press. To get in touch, email reasonpress@gmail.com or see our website reasonpress.net, where you'll also find our book Still Unbelievable. We welcome more feedback, and you might even end up on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. You can hear more of her music at soundcloud.com/hollybishop. You can support us by buying some of Holly's music and telling her we sent you.